Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Rachel, Author Engagement Manager at Kobo Writing Life.
And I'm Tara Kremen, Director of Kobo Writing Life. On today's episode, we talked to Tom Bromley. Tom is an author, editor, creative writing tutor, mentor, and ghostwriter. He's the author of a dozen works of fiction and nonfiction, including novels, short stories, memoirs, and general nonfiction. As a ghostwriter, he's written over 20 titles, including prize winners and bestsellers, but he won't tell us which ones. Tom has taught novel writing for over 15 years, including 10 years leading Faber Academy's online writing a novel and finish your draft courses. He currently teaches for Reedsy, where he is the head of learning and runs their flagship How to Write a Novel course.
We chatted with Tom about his entire career, how he got started as an author, made the shift into ghostwriting, and eventually why and how he became a teacher. He gave us a great overview of what to expect should you be interested in the Reedsy How to Write a Novel course, kind of gave us what you can expect from the course going in and how your novel will look when it's finished. It was a great, insightful conversation about all aspects of publishing, and I hope you enjoy.
So today we're here with Tom Bromley, who is an author, editor, tutor, ghostwriter, not the scary kind, thankfully. And can you start off by telling listeners a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. So I've done all different kinds of things in publishing. So I've worked in publishing for around 25 years now. So I started as a copywriter. So my first job, I used to write the blurbs on the back of books, which was a great introduction into publishing. And from there, I went on and became a commissioning editor for various kind of publishers, including Little Brown, who are now owned by Hachette, one of the big five, and was a commissioning editor for a number of years. At the same time, I've always been a writer, so I was writing my own books, had a couple of novels published, and then kind of wrote various other books and went freelance, and then have done sort of different things. So a mixture of my own writing, freelance editing, ghostwriting, as you mentioned, and teaching. Creative writing as well. So it's a sort of one of those sort of portfolio career kind of things of, different strings to your bow.
Now, you said you've kind of always been writing, but what was the journey into writing like? What was it that inspired you to become an author in the first place?
It was a bit backwards, actually. So when I was a teenager, I used to play a lot of music. So that was my big dream as a teenager. Was I didn't actually read very many books. It was all listening to music, playing in bands, hoping to get signed. Nearly got signed after university, didn't happen. And when I was in that band, I was sort of, it might not surprise you to know, I was the least rock and roll member of the band. So everyone else used to get up at about 2 p.m, and I'm a morning person. So that's when I started writing. I had this gap and this space. So I had to go writing a book. I sent some stuff off to a couple of literary agents, had a couple of bites back from that. And so when the band broke up, then I sort of got into the writing, and then it still took quite a while to get published eventually, but that was the sort of the starting point for me. So yes, not a normal kind of route into writing, but I don't know, having interviewed lots of authors over the years, everyone has a sort of similar but different kind of story about how they got there in the first place.
And do you like the challenge of you being a morning person in a band? Like, it just was never meant to be.
No. Well, I still play music now, but I think we're a bit older, so I think we're okay now. But yeah, I think, being a morning person is good for writing. That's definitely true.
So what was the experience of like writing and publishing your first book then? Is there anything that's memorable that stands out as a bit of a challenge?
So the first book I got published, so the stuff I was writing when I was in the band and had those bites, I sort of got sort of nowhere really. I didn't really know anything about writing what I was doing. So I remember sending off, I had this vision of writing a book that was going to be 300,000 words long, and kind of sent these letters off. I remember this one agent writing back and saying it was a sort of standard rejection letter. He just scribbled over the top, "No one will ever underline publish your book," which was not a great start. But he was absolutely right. It was ludicrous. I mean, 300,000 words would have been 1,500 pages, which no one wants to read of mine. But no, so I got stuck into another book, and I wrote that over kind of about 5 years. I went through about 5 drafts. I did an MA, which is sort of the UK equivalent of an MFA in creative writing. I got that job in publishing as a blurb writer, and I used to go into the office early. So my office hours started at 9:30. I would get in the office at 8:00 and write. Got an agent from the MFA stroke MA, sent it out the first time round, rejected by everybody. and then went back and used the feedback from the rejections to rewrite the book again. And then when we sent it out the second time around, then it finally got published. It was a nice moment, but it was a long haul. And I think, although I did do the MFA, I don't think I learned a huge amount of writing off that course in a strange kind of way. So I think for me, looking back, I sort of taught myself to write by writing that book. So it shouldn't necessarily take you 5 years to learn how to write. I sort of learnt it by doing all the wrong things first.
It sounds like you've had quite a bit of a journey having those rejections that have come through, and like that very, I mean, I hope you kept that editor's notes as a little bit of a I'll show you moment. But how do you stay motivated to keep writing? Like, it sounds like it wasn't that much of a hurdle knocking you down. You were just like, okay, I'm going to take your notes and I'm going to make it better. I feel like a lot of writers would be it then. I tried. We're done.
Well, I think I learned early on, or I must have spoken to someone who told me that you had to have quite a thick skin to be a writer, and rejection is part and parcel of the process. And really, when you get rejected by agents and publishers, it's nothing personal. It's a business decision. They're looking at this thinking, can I sell this? And actually for that one, that guy, he wasn't the most tactful letter writer back, but he was absolutely right. And I think most writers have got a drawer full of rejection letters. I mean, I'm old enough that, you still used to send your manuscript out with a stamped addressed envelope, and you were meant to send it to one person at a time and wait for that to come back before you sent it on to the next one. So I don't know if people have a drawer full of, where they printed out the rejection emails in quite the same way now, but I think it's fairly standard. And there's lots of writers that I like who had similar stories. So Tibor Fischer, who's a writer I really like, whose first novel was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, I think was rejected by 59 agents and published before he got published. John Kennedy Toole, A Confederacy of Dunces, which is one of my favourite books. Very sad story. Actually couldn't get a publisher, took his life, and his mother carried on pushing the book, and it took her a further decade before it was picked up and then won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So I think you sort of read stories like that, and that sort of gives you the encouragement that if it's good enough, it will eventually kind of make its way to the top of the pile.
I'm curious because you mentioned that you started by writing music. You were in a band. How do you think learning how to write music first influenced your writing of prose?
That's a good question. I guess in two ways, because I used to write music and I used to write the lyrics as well. So certainly playing around with words and getting lyrics to fit must have helped in just terms of kind of experimenting with writing. I always find with teaching writing as well that people come from different ways they've written, whether they've written journals, whether they've written articles for newspapers or whatever it is. It's doing the writing itself you kind of learn. I think with the music, I suspect it must have taught me something about rhythm and about pacing and about feel in that kind of way. It is different as a way of writing. I suppose if you're writing a song, it's designed to be listened to again and again and again. So it has that kind of repeat factor. Whereas if you're writing a novel, unless it's brilliant, and even if it is brilliant, the chances are that most people are only going to read it once. So it's going to work in a different way. And I've done it a couple of times where I've worked with, who I won't name, worked with rock stars who've written fiction, written novels. And actually it's quite interesting where with one of them I could see how he had written, the lyrics were sort of transposed straight into how he's writing the actual kind of written prose. They had to sort of unpick that and sort of explain they had to do it slightly differently. But yeah, I think whatever you've done kind of pre-writing fiction, I'm sure it has some kind of bearing. So yeah, I'm sure music does play a part. And I listen to a lot of music. That's the other thing as well. I think when I write, I have to have some kind of music on in the background whilst I'm working.
Can you write with music with lyrics? I'm always fascinated. Okay, I'm fascinated by people who can do that.
No, it's so I play and listen to a lot of jazz. So that's one thing I listen to, and also just movie soundtracks as well. I think are really good for atmosphere to write to too. So, but yeah, anything with lyrics just gets in my head, and I can't do it. Anyone who does that, I don't understand either. I
know, Rachel. I think you're a fan of like the video game soundtracks too, right? Like we've talked about this before.
Yeah, I love a video game soundtrack because it's really atmospheric because that's all it is. Much like movie soundtracks, really just setting the vibe. So you have to find one that kind of meshes with what you're writing.
get into the zone. And I tend to find that I don't know if you find, I tend to find an album for when I'm working on a particular book, and then that just goes on repeat. I think it drives everyone else crazy in the house, but you get in the zone, and then you just, it just goes round and round and round in the background for months.
So you mentioned working with kind of a musician and seeing their writing from like song to fiction or into kind of a different style of book. Kind of segues well into like your ghostwriting. Always a bit curious about how you got into that and whether or not it's a challenge to kind of write somebody else's voice, or is it easier per se?
It's different, I would say. So when I started, the first couple of jobs I got through having been an editor and worked in publishing. So it was the memoir of a TV celebrity here in the UK, and he wanted to write it himself in the first instance, and he wrote it on a typewriter. So I was given this doorstep of a manuscript to then sort of edit and shape into a book. And in doing that, there was some writing new sections in it as well. So it was a sort of half editing, half ghosting job. And then I got another sort of more straighter ghostwriting job from the same editor off the back of that. And then I tend to find, certainly in the UK, that a lot of the ghostwriting gigs are word of mouth. So then came through, an agent that he knew, and then that agent passed my name on to somebody else. And so that's how I sort of got that gig, and that built up. I think it's a funny thing, ghostwriting. I think it's a little bit like acting. You're trying to capture somebody's voice. So usually when I'm doing it, particularly with the celebrity memoir, you're sitting down and conducting hours and hours and hours of interviews with these people, and then working through the transcripts, trying to look for the shapes and the sounds of how they speak naturally. My starting point with these books is the memoir of Keith Richards, which I think is a fantastic book, and I love it because it reads like you're sat in the pub and he's telling you stories about being in the Rolling Stones, and so that's what I always try and get. And sometimes that's a little, not a struggle with a celebrity, but you're trying to explain that he wants to feel conversational, and they're worried that their English teacher from school is going to read it and think that they can't write proper English. And I'm saying, well, no, it's not like that. It's meant to be you. It's meant to feel and sound like. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing. And I think for me, you always have a meeting before you start a book to see whether you're the person who's going to be writing, whether you're going to get on with the person, and whether you're going to click. But it's a fascinating insight into a whole realm of different individuals and people. So I've done musicians, I've done rock stars, I've done TV celebrities, I've done politicians, businessmen, economists, soldiers, all kinds of weird and wonderful and fascinating individuals who you wouldn't come across in your normal life otherwise.
That Keith Richards book is great, by the way, if anyone hasn't read it. I remember I got really frustrated when I was reading it because I was like, oh, just all this name dropping. And then I had to check myself and I'm like, it's Keith Richards. This is just his life. Like, they're just these people around him. So yeah, but I really enjoyed it. Bit of curious about just a trend recently where ghostwriters sort of coming out of the wings and not being ghosts anymore. I know with Harry, like Prince Harry's book, there was talk about that ghostwriter. What do you think about that? Or do you ever have any sort of ambitions to reveal yourself?
Well, usually with the books, you find that you're signing some kind of NDA, some non-disclosure agreement, so you can't. And then when you're credited in the book, it varies so much from project to project. So I've had them sometimes where it says with Tom Bromley on the title page. Sometimes you're thanked euphemistically in the acknowledgements. Sometimes you're not mentioned at all. For me, I don't mind. I think I know I've done the job, and if they're happy and the book's good, then that's kind of enough for me. I don't need for everyone to know that I've written it. It has changed over the years. So certainly back in the 80s, the ghostwriter would be named. So, for example, when George Michael wrote his first memoir with Tony Parsons, the front cover was bare George Michael with Tony Parsons. And you would have this slightly odd mix where you would have the sort of first person narrative, and then it would be interspersed with sections in the third person, which were more kind of journalistic sections that Tony was more obviously writing. And in the UK in publishing in the 90s, that seemed to disappear. And then I think the publishers decided that the readers liked the conceit that the celebrity had written the book themselves, even if they hadn't. So that was when the names kind of slipped off. So yeah, I know there's there's talk about that should come back. Yeah, I'm personally not too bothered about that myself. But yeah, if people want to do that, then fair enough. And I think with the Prince Harry ghostwriter, he sort of outed himself, didn't he? I think he was quite keen. Everybody knew that he'd written that, which to me is not the code of ghostwriting. You kind of keep
That's why I could never be a ghostwriter. I just feel like, hey, that was totally me.
Well, I think I'm generally scared of all these legal, documents I've signed. But it's amazing what you get told. And I've had a few books where I guess because it's almost like you're with some of these people that you're like a sort of psychotherapist or a kind of therapist or something, and they start telling you really very personal, intimate stuff, and then you have this dilemma about, do I put this in the book? Because I know the publisher would like this kind of juicy stuff in the book, but you feel this sort of duty of care to the person you're doing. So usually I kind of leave it out before it heads to the publishers. Otherwise, it will end up in the finished book.
So you're telling us you have some untold book of secrets that hasn't been written yet.
Yeah, I think if I didn't want to do the work anymore, I could write a long list.
I would read it.
What some of these people have been up to. It's fascinating, and it's very, I'm always touched when people talk to you in that kind of way. But it is like being a therapist. I mean, I guess it's an unusual thing for them to be sat down and talking for 40 to 50 hours about their life. And I think because you're a relative stranger, it's actually quite easy to talk to you. It's not like it's someone who they know well, so they feel sometimes that they can completely offload about all kinds of interesting things. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm with Tara. I could never be a ghostwriter. I just want all the hot goss, and then I just want to share it with everybody, which I think says a lot about who I am as a person. But I'm curious because Tara mentioned finding somebody else's voice while you're ghostwriting. Do you ever find it to be a struggle to get back into your own voice after spending so much time in somebody else's head?
Not so much with the ghostwriting. I think I'm okay enough to sort of separate that out, but I tend to be fairly mono, that I can sort of work on one book at a time. I remember once there was a ghostwriting, there were two ghostwriting books I was doing, and they overlapped because one was running late. And so I was writing one of them in the morning in one voice and the other one in the afternoon in a different voice. And that completely did my head in. I really struggled to kind of separate that out. But I think generally, because they are non-fiction and the stuff I'm writing is fiction, I think that's okay. There was, who was it? I think it was Nicholas Blinko, who's a British author who became a commissioning editor for fiction. And so he was writing his own fiction and editing the fiction at the same time. And I remember, I think he left his job because he couldn't do it, and I couldn't work out how you could do that. I think if there's fiction and non-fiction, you can separate out, but fiction, I think would be too much.
I know. I don't know how anyone would balance that. It's like when authors are writing multiple series at once. I never understand how they're able to do it.
It's like those people that you sometimes come across who have like 3 or 4 books on the go at the same time.
I also don't understand that, unless it's like an audiobook and a book you're reading. Again, it's like the separation that kind of can make sense.
I'm reading 4 books right now, so that I can do, but they're so different. Like, I'm not going to confuse the Cher memoir with the like literary fiction sad girl book I'm reading.
So how do you decide which one to read? When do you switch from one to the other? Is it depending on what mood you're in? How does it work?
A lot of it is mood or place. I do like 2 different types of audiobooks. So I like to have audiobooks while I'm like cleaning or running or walking around the city. And then I have my bedtime book. And then I have my commuting book, which is usually on my Kobo and easier to digest. So they all have a time and a place.
That's pretty cool. I'm very dull. I can only do one at a time.
Same. Unless it's an audiobook. But so let's get into, you're teaching the Reedsies how to write a novel course, and I'm really excited to chat about it. You've been a tutor before. I'm kind of curious how you got into the teaching part. Did you do that while you were also working in publishing and editing, or was it kind of just a happy thing that you've kind of fallen into?
I sort of fell into it. So I was doing some sort of teaching kind of locally here in Salisbury where I live, just to kind of try it out. And then I knew someone who was teaching for the Faber Academy, and they were looking for another person to teach a novel course. So I was sort of in the right place at the right time for that. And then I went on and I taught novel writing for the Faber Academy for about 10 years or so. So I sort of wrote and taught the majority of the online courses there, and then a couple of years ago moved across to Reedsy to kind of teach this course instead. But yeah, I guess when you're an editor or a commissioning editor, because you're working one-to-one with with authors generally, it's a sort of similar sort of setup at the start, and then you're kind of expanding out from there. So it's a new skill, but it was sort of building on skills that I already developed during my time as an editor, I think.
Can you give us a little bit of an overview of the course with Reedsy and what participants can expect when they enroll?
Yeah, so I always try and describe the course as picture a sort of NaNoWriMo meets masterclass, and by that I mean it's sort of a 3-month course. It's 15 weeks, and the idea is that you come out at the end of the course having written a full draft of the novel that you're working on. So in the NaNoWriMo way, you'd be writing 50,000 words over 4 weeks. Here you're writing, we suggest 75,000 words over 15 weeks. And at the same time, you're then getting the teaching for the course. So we recorded around 25 hours of videos. So you're getting a daily video on a different writing topic. And those are done thematically, kind of week by week. So you start with a week on beginnings and you end with a week on endings. And then you sort of do everything else in between. So it's a combination of teaching each day to give you that little bit of motivation to get writing, but with enough space that then you've got the room to do the writing as well. And we teach it in a cohort, so you're in a group with a number of other writers at the same time, and then everyone who's doing the course comes together on a Monday when I do a sort of masterclass live, and that's either a live editing session or it's a deep dive into a writing topic, or we have kind of guest authors along, and that's a chance for kind of everyone to kind of catch up and see where they're at.
A live editing session sounds daunting to me. Can you tell me a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah, so how I do it, I've got this device called the Remarkable, and you can kind of link it up to the computer, so you have the writer's kind of text up on the screen, and then I can use an electronic pen and actually draw the edits on the screen as I go through, so you can see it how I would change the words kind of live on the screen. People find it really useful. I'm always amazed how much, because it's obviously you've got the people whose work you're editing, but actually you learn so much about other people's, from other people's work, what you can then take away and use on yours. So yeah, it's I've done that for a while, but people find that kind of really useful and helpful, just to get a sense, I suppose, of how a professional editor would restructure and rewrite what is there.
And I assume you're like describing what you're doing at the same time as well.
Yeah. It's not silent. Yeah, no.
You're like, it's just the anticipation of what word you're going to go towards. Like,
no, it's not like I would be editing in.
I mean, you can take that idea if you want to make it more challenging.
I think there was
silently crossing out somebody's work.
It was a Monty Python sketch, wasn't it, where they had Thomas Hardy writing a book live, and just had this commentary where after about 3 minutes he'd written the word "the," and then he kind of crossed it out.
You say that, but I misspell the word "the" when I type constantly. So I always thought if I ever had a band, it would be called the "te" instead of the "thes," because I think that's funny.
Very good.
There we go. So you're telling us a little bit how the course is structured there. I'm kind of curious about who do you think is the ideal participant? Is it really based for somebody that's kind of just writing their very first novel, or is it geared toward more experienced writers?
I've tried to pitch it so whether you're new or whether you are experienced, it still works for you. And I think one of the things I know from people who I've taught over the years is that writing in a community setting is so important in getting you to the end of the script. So I've got people who've come and they've done MFAs, or they've done other kind of creative writing novel courses before, but want to kind of work on a script in the company of other people. I've got lots of people on the course who've written for the first time, but I've tried to structure the teaching that whether you're coming new or whether you are more experienced, there's still stuff that you will pick up day by day in the teaching videos. It'll either sort of refresh you, or hopefully you go and see the writing in a new way, in the same way that when you go, you read a different book about writing, that you're still reading about description or plot or character, but that different perspective helps you just kind of hopefully takes you somewhere new and different in how it is that you're writing and working.
And you mentioned that writing community can be so important, and it is such an important aspect of writing, which can feel so siloed and individual. Can you tell us a bit about the writing community that's available within this course?
Yeah, so as well as the live sessions that I lead, the students discuss in forums. So there's daily forums, and there's forums for each of the groups to kind of chat about the writing. We have what we call Feedback Friday. So every Friday you have the opportunity to share work with the other students, and I kind of come up with a rota and divide up who's paired with who each week. So you're getting that sort of feedback regularly as and when you want it. But I always think as important as that is the relationships that build up, and actually the support that you give to each other. And what I really like is someone says, someone posts up, "Oh, I'm stuck, I can't write today," or "I can't do this," and then you get suggestions and advice from other people. And I think that's where those groups work really well. And what I also really like about these groups, because it's online, you get a completely international audience, so you get these connections from people in different parts of the world who would never have met each other normally, who then form these strong kind of writing friendships. And I've seen that time and time again, and it's fantastic when that happens.
I know it's sort of early-ish days, but has anyone ever gone and then met in person from the cohort?
Yes, I think it tends to be if people are kind of passing through. So I sort of when I taught in Faber with the groups, it was if someone was coming to London, then people in the UK would kind of move together. But yeah, I think people have met when they've kind of lived kind of locally, kind of near, or reasonably kind of near each other. I think, but we're all over. So I think the majority or the biggest grouping of people tend to be from North America. But then we've got UK, Europe, Australia, India. I was teaching last night and live editing one of my students from India, and it must have been 2 or 3 in the morning there. So I was like, so I couldn't work out whether she'd stayed up or kind of got up early. But it was that was dedication to the writing for sure.
And you mentioned Feedback Fridays. And I feel like we talk a lot within the publishing community about how to take feedback and digest it to make your work better. But do you have any advice about giving other writers feedback on their work?
I think that the 2 key things I always think is that, firstly, it's really important to be specific rather than general. I think that is so important. So rather than saying, you're not very good at dialogue, focusing on this piece of dialogue and why this bit doesn't work. I think if you focus it like that, then when you get criticism, it's a lot easier to kind of take and digest. And then the other thing I think that's really important is to say the things you like as well as the things that you think need changing. It's very easy to miss out on that, but I think that's so important. And I think feedback always feels harsher actually written down than face to face. So actually, I ask people just to be careful and think about when they put stuff down, because you will read that in a slightly different way than if you and I were kind of discussing the work in person. So that's my main thing. I'm having one student who was she was a chef in Australia, and she couldn't deal with positive praise. It was fascinating. I think she'd obviously worked in like a Gordon Ramsay style kitchen where she was shouted at and told, you're effing this and you're effing that the whole time. And if I said that to her, she was like, great, I can go away and change the book. But if I said, I really like this chapter, she just simply did not know what to deal with it. But she was the exception. Mostly people do like positive praise on their work, and I think that's important to give.
I think that's good advice for feedback giving in general, even outside of the writing, because it can be hard, and it can be hard to receive feedback too. So good advice. Can we talk a little bit about craft then, seeing that's your expertise? What advice would you give to somebody who is really just starting out to write their first novel?
So the 2 things I always say, and one of the things that the course is based on is the importance of reading. So I always say that a good writer is a good reader, and the more you read and read closely, the better the writer you're going to become. And on the course, I try and get people to read as much as possible. We look at extracts and try and see if we can, work out what is making those tick. And I always say, as much as someone like myself can teach, the books are the best teachers. And I think when I started writing, one of the things I did was to go back to books I really liked, and I used to plot out their structures. I got a sort of big sheet of A3 and would try and, analyze how the book was structured, what they were doing, how that worked. And I sort of taught myself a way of how to do that rather than reading the kind of how-to books. And I think that's a far more productive way than reading a kind of writing guide for me. So yeah, the first thing I would say would be read. The second thing is to write. A writer writes, you learn by writing. So get stuck in. And I think most people will find, with the first book you write, that might not be the first book that goes on to get published, but you learn so much just from going through the process. So, run with it and see where it goes, I think is really, really important.
And I feel like one common issue that a lot of writers come up against is the dreaded writer's block. And I'm curious if you have any advice to overcome it, or how you personally overcome it when you are faced with that dreaded blank document.
Yeah, sort of a couple of things. I always say to everyone on the course that when they're starting, but I think writing's a little bit like a tap. So there's moments when the tap is open and the words are kind of flowing out, and when that's there, you just need to write as much as possible. But there will be moments when that tap runs dry. And when that happens, I think it's crucial that you don't beat yourself up about that. I think there's nothing to be gained from that at all. There's nothing to be gained by looking at a blank screen or a blank piece of paper. So I would do something else at that point. I would go away and read, or do some editing or something, or come back. The other thing that I think is really, really useful is to get out of your chair, get away from the desk, go for a walk or something. There's a lot of history and research into the importance of activity and exercise and getting oxygen in the brain. And it's fascinating how often you can put yourself in a different position, you go for a walk, and then the ideas will start coming again. So don't sit at the desk if nothing's happening. Go and do something else, would be my advice.
I think there's great advice, because there's no worse feeling than sitting down like you are meant to do something and then it's just not happening. And then you get caught in that vicious cycle of like, well, I'm supposed to be doing this, but I can't. So I think, getting up and fresh air is a great idea.
And the other thing I find as well is I think sometimes people find it's hard. One of the hardest things is actually to start. And so I remember one writer telling me that, which I have copied, is when they finish writing for the day, they always finish mid-sentence. So when they sit down the next day, they can immediately kind of carry on writing. And I think having something like that is a nice little kind of sort of technique just to kind of keep the words flowing, rather than going, oh my God, where do I start? Immediately you're in the thick of it and you can get going the following day.
How about if there's aspects of, because I know there's like the blank page and the actual creative writing piece, or if you're not really feeling that, could you put your energy into like maybe plotting out something or researching, or would you worry that you get a little bit too lost down that path then as well?
No, I think if it's, if it's not working, I think there's no point kind of forcing it. So I would go and do something different. I've sometimes had it with writers where they've gone on written something different. So they've gone and worked on kind of short stories or something before coming to the novel, if they've got completely stuck, just to kind of remind themselves why they're into kind of writing in the first place. But I think there's lots you could do. You go away and research. You can go away and do some editing or some plotting or something. But I think the main thing really is, if you put more pressure on yourself, then that's only going to make the situation more difficult. So you need to kind of do the opposite about that and remind yourself that, in that classification, all things must pass. This moment won't be there forever. You just need to kind of sit it out, and then the words will come again.
Nice. I think that's great advice. And in your sort of like 10 plus, if not more, years of experience with teaching, do you have any tips or kind of things that you see as common trends with creating compelling and believable characters?
I think that the key for characters with me, well, a couple of things. Firstly, is understanding that difference between writing a character that readers will like and writing a character that readers will kind of care about. I often seem to fall into kind of Star Wars kind of talk, and it's a difference between writing Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. You want someone who you want to care about, who might have a kind of rough edge to them. If they're just a kind of nice person, and sometimes I find with authors that they feel they want the main character to be nice because they're worried that if they make their main character nasty, that people might think that they're nasty. So you need to get over that and understand that actually what's important is that the reader cares about the character, and that is different to liking. I'll say that's the first thing. I think the second thing that's crucial is the having that sense of some kind of flaw or vulnerability within them. I think that's crucial in making these characters feel real and feel human. And again, I think when people start writing, that can be quite a hard thing to do or to get down to the page, particularly if it's drawing on something from kind of personal experience. But I think that vulnerability, again, is what makes kind of characters tick and what readers kind of really respond to.
Poor Luke Skywalker, out here just being a nice guy. No one likes him as much as Han.
Well, I think it's a good analogy. I think I use I can't remember. I think I use kind of several Star Wars analogies in the course, but it's a good starting point for a lot of fictional ideas actually.
It makes perfect sense. I just feel bad for the guy. So moving on. Curious about your take on the everlasting debate of plotting versus pantsing. I'm kind of curious, like, where you stand and if you have any advice for authors who really struggle with structure.
I think for me that debate is slightly misleading. I mean, I always say it's more a kind of sliding scale for me between kind of hard plotting and hard pantsing, as it were. And you've got to find the sweet spot where you sit on that spectrum between having everything plotted out before you start and having kind of complete space to see where the book is going to go. And everyone is slightly different. So I think there's no hard and fast rule. And I'm always slightly wary of anyone saying you can't start writing until you've done all this, all this work beforehand. Sort of work out kind of what works for you, I think, is the first thing. Secondly, I'm personally, which I don't teach on the course, I'm slightly wary of those how to plot your book kind of structures. I mean, I mentioned kind of Star Wars there. Kind of George Lucas very much drew on the the hero with 1,000 faces, which was kind of the start of a lot of the storytelling techniques, things like the writer's journey or kind of save the cat or kind of theories like that. I guess because I've taught long enough that you're reading a book and you can see quite clearly what the author is using these structures. And so I'm slightly wary of using those. I think it's more useful really for me to think about the plot in terms of characters. I would start with character rather than plot. Think about the character journey and how the characters are changing and get the plot to work around that rather than getting the characters to work around the plot would be my advice. So generally, I would say the most important thing before starting to write is spend that time sorting your characters out, and then the plot should unfold from that. And where do you both stand on the spectrum?
I mean, I'm a terrible procrastinator, but I also love having things very structured. So the worst of both of them is where I stand.
Yeah, I fall into a very similar camp. I'm also I'm an ideas guy. Like, I'll be like, I got a great idea for a story, but I don't know how to get from point A to point B. So I just write the first chapter. So I have like a bazillion first chapters in my life, but that's just gone after that. So, like Tara, just the worst of both worlds.
I'm fascinated, obviously, because I interview a lot of authors for the course. I'm always amazed how many of those authors have done no planning at all, including a lot of crime authors. I always assume that crime authors must be the people who do planning before they start, and they just have a rough idea, and then it's like, no, I'm just going to write it and see where it goes, and I'll kind of sort that out in the edit. And I find that daunting. There was one author, a literary author I interviewed, who said that she started with a character and a scene, and that was it. And then she sat down to write the novel. And I thought that was amazing. I need to do a little bit more than that, but I think I find that really instructive when you're reading all these how-to books, and you've got to do all this stuff, and then you talk to the professionals, and actually a lot of them aren't doing any of that at all. They're sort of trusting their instincts to see where things are going to go.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough in this position as podcast host to talk to a lot of writers. And I'd say the majority fall into I kind of have a loose idea, but then the story just takes me. And some of them crime writers. And I'm like, how are you planting these red herrings without planning ahead? It's fascinating.
I find it amazing. I don't know how they do it. I mean, I guess if you've written enough, whether you just learn to kind of trust your instincts that it's going to work out. I think the other thing I would say with those books and with structures is that the novel is a different beast to writing a screenplay. I think a lot of those storytelling books and ideas are based around writing a screenplay where there's a more natural structure because the film's got to be, 90 minutes or 2 hours if you're not doing the Brutalist or however long that is. But, you're writing on a larger canvas. So then I think there's more room and scope on how the book is structured. So you don't have to follow the traditional formulas in quite the same way.
It is also just about finding your own groove, I think, as well. That's what we hear from a lot of authors. Everyone has their own kind of spin on things. And I guess like certain principles are universal, but people just find what works for them. I think trusting that, I think, is important.
I think that's really good advice, and I think that's exactly right. I think a lot of what I try to do with a lot of the teaching is not to be too prescriptive. As you say, it's about working out what works for you. So it's like giving people options, but giving them the space to kind of, find out what is the formula and method that is best for them to get the words down on the page.
And has your time as a teacher, has that changed what's worked for you personally in your writing process?
Yes, I think it works two ways as the teacher. I think sometimes you find it can be a bit of a sort of a time suck and can also take, creative energy out of you because you're working on other people's work and you're trying to come up with ideas about how you could change things and how those work. So carving out that space for that, I think, is really, really important. But I find it really inspiring to see people who are, really excited, watching them change as writers. I think that's always the most exciting thing for me when I read something they've written at the start of the course and then I see something they've written at the end of the course and it's completely different. And I feel, okay, that's great. You've gone on a journey. I have helped and facilitated that in some way, but that, that main effort and the hard work is all yours. And that's really pleasing to see. So it's that sort of inspires me to kind of, to keep writing and, because, I think those stories are great.
Is there a lesson or a tip that you've picked up from a student that has made its way into your writing process?
I'm trying to think. Probably not one specifically. I think it's more keeping you honest. I think so. Sometimes I think I can, by myself, I can get a bit, convoluted in what I'm writing. And then when you go back and you read people's stuff and then you're doing the feedback, what we talked about earlier about how you can learn from other people's work to reflect back on yours. And you can see as you're editing their work down, it's like, okay, I've gone too far in this. I remember with, actually it was one of my ghostwriting books. I just found myself writing longer and longer sentences and using, colons and semicolons, which I really, really like. But I kind of thought, actually, this is getting too complicated once I'm writing with all these in here. That's not how this should be working. So then that was a lesson for me to kind of go back and just keep things a little bit more simple again.
I have a very nerdy, somewhat off-topic question that I love to ask editors. What is your favorite punctuation mark?
Gosh, that is a very good question.
Tara's laughing at me, but thank you.
It's because I'm laughing as well because like colon and semicolon, I just call it double dots, which is so silly because there's the North American, they call it something else as well, right? And I always get it mixed up. So I was laughing at
double dots.
Double dots.
It probably would be the colon or the semicolon, actually, the double dots.
Parenthesis, that's the word that I always get tripped up on because that's like the North American version of the colon, right?
I mean, I like a good ampersand, but no? I don't.
Ooh.
That's
ampersand is good too.
Ampersand is good too. Good. But yeah, I think using colons and semicolons rather than dashes. I mean, I think there's always that thing as a writer where you see people aren't quite sure how to use them, so they just stick a dash in instead. But a colon and semicolon, when they're used right, is a very kind of satisfying thing.
See, I'm an M dash girly, but only when it's used correctly. If you have a well-placed M dash, I'm there for it. But once you overuse them, I'm out.
Yeah, good point.
Now I just want you both debating Oxford commas.
Pro.
I like commas, but I think generally you can take a few out. There's a lovely quote from Raymond Carver where he once said that when a story is finished, when you're going through and you start taking out the commas that you kind of put in on the previous round. So I think, yeah, once you're down to that level, then then the book is probably finished.
Speaking of finished books, this is actually a great segue into a question I have for you. When students are done taking your course, they have a completed novel. Where do they go from there? What do you usually guide them on to next steps once they've completed that draft?
Well, I think once you finish that first draft, for me, I think that's where one of the most fun bits of writing comes in with the rewriting. So my advice normally would be to stick the book in a drawer. No one sticks the book in a drawer these days, but to put it away for kind of 4 to 6 weeks and then come back to it, read it fresh, read it as a whole first, read it in a different way to how you've written it. So either print it out. It's actually really good. You can kind of put it on a Kindle or something. One writer I work with suggests that you print it out in a different font, so that you're kind of seeing it in a slightly different way, and then make your way through the revisions and the edits. I would get other reads, whether it's kind of beta reads. What's really nice with the students in the course is that because they form these little groups, that then they will carry on reading and sharing kind of work and kind of giving people advice there. I think if you can do it yourself, have a go with it yourself. The kind of Reedsy site is full of kind of editors and freelancers who will do, book coaching or development editing or editorial assessment. So I would probably, go down that route at some point. But if you can see what needs doing to the book first, I would have a go at editing it first and then get professional advice at the next stage, I would say.
And just wondering if there's any, and maybe you don't have one specific piece of advice, but is there anything that has really stuck with you as a piece of advice that you've received as a writer?
Two things, really. So I think when I first started writing, I loved the work of kind of Raymond Carver, who I think is an amazing kind of short story writer. And he wrote a brilliant essay just called On Writing. And those 4 pages, if you've never read them, are kind of gold dust for me in terms of how to write. And he's got a great phrase there, which was get in, get out, don't linger, which I think is really, really good kind of writing advice. From my own writing, I remember working with one editor who read a script that I'd written, and he said, you start too slowly and you take too long getting out of scenes. And he said, with most of you can probably delete the first and the last paragraph in each chapter and it will be better. And actually I went back and did it, and he was exactly right. I was, took a while to get going at the start of scenes and kind of waffling away at the end. So actually, ever since then, whenever I go back to the editing, the first thing I do is to top and tail. And 9 times out of 10, the scene or the chapter is better from losing that first and last chapter. Sorry, first and last paragraph, I should say.
I think that's great advice. And would you say the top and tail? That's not the first time I've heard that either. I've definitely interviewed a writer who has said she always, her first chapter, usually gone, and then a lot of the first paragraphs as well. I
think you find that you sort of write yourself into a scene or into a story. So generally you can take out that warm-up stuff and you can see where the story kind of proper begins and just get there that little bit quicker. There's a quote, I can't remember who it was, one of the from a screenwriter who said, when you're writing, it should be like a party. You should arrive late and leave early. And I think that's quite good. That's quite good advice.
Big slogans to have on the wall behind you as you're writing, or just something that you can look at, or just a poster. Well, I think we could stay talking with you for such a long time. I really appreciate the time to come and chat with us. So what's next for you personally with your writing, and where can readers go to learn about the course that you're offering as well?
So with the course, the place to look at is reedsy.com/learning. So we've got cohorts starting usually every kind of 6 weeks to 2 months. So the next one is March the 3rd, and then the next date after that is towards the end of April. So if you're interested, go and look at the website, and I'll give you kind of more details there. With my own writing, I've got one ghostwriting project that I signed an NDA for this morning, so I can't tell you what that one's about, but I'm quite excited about it. It's different to all the different types of ghostwriting people I've talked about kind of earlier on. So I think that's going to be an interesting one to do. And I'm working on a novel of my own at the moment. So I've written 2 drafts. So I need to go away and write the next draft of that now. It's a long, slow process, this particular novel. But I just need some space to go back and kind of attack it properly. And hopefully with the third draft, it'll get closer to fruition than it has been on round 1 or round 2.
Busy guy. How do you balance all of this?
I'm tired. I think most people I know who are writers do lots of different things, and that's how you kind of pay the rent and kind of juggle everything. And hopefully, each thing feeds into everything else and kind of inspires you that little bit to keep going. Yeah. And as I was saying earlier, I think with the ghostwriter my own writing, they're separate enough. I can sort of keep those, going at the same time.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting to us today. And if people are interested, they should definitely check out the course.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been lovely chatting.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in the Reedsy How to Write a Novel course, we'll include links in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. Be sure to follow us on social. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads.
This episode was hosted by Tara Kremen and Rachel Wharton, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and a huge thanks to Tom for being our guest. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.